I think what you're going to see is an investigation commissioned. And I think their view is that investigation can take a year or a year and a half to be completed.
And all the wind out of our sails.
Well, I'm not quite sure that it'll work that way, because I think the investigation, if it's run well, will grind slowly but will grind fine. And I think it's going to result in the disclosure of a lot of deep, dark secrets that we don't know about now. So I think one thing they're planning to do is review the files of the Office of Legal Counsel, pull out all these secret memoranda, declassify and publish them, and also build an authoritative account of who did what when. And I think that account's going to tell us that the administration's claim that torture was introduced as a result of requests that came from down below to give people more latitude, that's a bunch of hooey, that that's definitely not true. I think we're going to hear in a definitive new account that torture came basically from Dick Cheney and his office. They decided they wanted to do it, and they pushed it through over opposition from people in the military and in the CIA, in fact.
Right. It sure seems to be that way. Lawrence Wilkerson, Colin Powell's former chief of staff, said that on anti-war radio, that was the case, that he, from the paperwork that he saw, it all came from Cheney and Libby and Addington and
everyone I've interviewed, both within the CIA and the military, has confirmed that. I've talked to some of the TJAGs. I've talked to very senior intelligence people, both retired and currently serving. The accounts I get from all of them is consistent, and it all says, this all came out of Cheney's office. Mm-hmm. And moreover, he was adamant. He wanted this done.
So which laws are we talking about have been violated here? I mean, obviously America is a signatory to the Geneva Convention and to the Anti-Torture Convention. And then I guess I understand that there's regular federal laws passed by the Congress, signed by various presidents, which enforce these international treaties. Can you give us a brief rundown on, if you were the prosecutor, what kind of laws you're talking about?
Yeah, specifically there are two federal statutes. One is the War Crimes Act from 1996, and the other is the Anti-Torture Act, which was passed at the time the U.S. ratified the Convention Against Torture. So although we have international agreements, it's just plain vanilla federal criminal law that is the enforcement mechanism here. And it's very, very clear that what was done is a violation of both of these statutes. I think subsequent statutes that were passed by the Bush administration, the Military Commissions Act, created immunity for the people down on the ground. So all those interrogators, CIA interrogators, military interrogators, they really don't have anything to worry about. I mean, they're covered. They have immunity. But the people who made the policy, they're also subject to these statutes, and they have no immunity under the shield that the Bush administration created. So they're the ones who are most at risk. In fact, I'd say out of the entire group, probably the lawyers are the ones who are most exposed. In fact, I would note last night on German television, Manfred Novak, Professor Novak, who is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, he's the person who has oversight responsibility to ensure that countries enforce or live up to the obligations they made under the convention. He issued a statement in which he said George W. Bush, having left the office of president, no longer has head of state immunity. And he said now it is incumbent upon the new government to initiate a criminal investigation. He said that in his investigation there was no question but that torture had been introduced by the Bush administration as a matter of policy, that this was clearly a violation of the Convention Against Torture. And under the convention, the member states are obligated to enforce the convention through criminal prosecution. So he said, the clock is ticking. You have to begin your prosecution.
Mm-hmm. And if we don't, then other countries have universal jurisdiction, so that I guess my understanding is that if one German was harmed in the invasion of Iraq or in the torturing of a citizen at a ghost prison somewhere or something, then they then have standing to carry out these prosecutions that the Americans won't.
That's right. You wouldn't even have to have a German harmed, although that would give them a stronger basis to act. But yes, it is subject to universal jurisdiction.
Wait. So even I don't know, Chile or Angola or anyone could indict.
That's correct. They could. If you have one of your nationals involved, you have a much stronger basis. So I'd say the countries that have the strongest basis right now are probably Spain and Italy, both of whom have citizens or nationals who have been held in Guantanamo or in one of the black sites, and both of them have open criminal investigations right now which are targeting U.S. government officials. And I point out, by the way, that these are both NATO allies of the United, not just NATO allies of the United States, they're NATO allies of the United States that sent troops to Iraq supporting the United States. That's not the issue here. The issue is upholding the Geneva Conventions and the Convention Against Torture, which they have a very serious attitude about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's all very interesting, but at the same time, America would invade Spain before they let Spain prosecute American government officials that outside of our law, right?
I don't think so. I think right now, I've talked to the investigating judge in Spain who tells me that he's very sharply focused on 4 lawyers, David Addington, John Yu, Alberto Gonzalez, and Jim Haynes. And I think if any of them were to land in Europe, they'd wind up being at the other end of an extradition request instantly. And the 25 nations of Europe have a convention under which they automatically extradite, so they'd land in a jail in Spain in a matter of 48 hours. And what would the reaction of Americans be? I think actually the reaction of most Americans would be to applaud.
Well, I actually agree with that, and I was thinking earlier about how the last time I saw a poll like this, it was years ago, 3 or 4, well, maybe it was 2005, something like that, which, yeah, I guess that is going on 4 years ago now, where I think 55% said they favored impeachment if it could be shown that they lied us into war, something like that, which basically means that the American people were pretty open to the idea of holding these people accountable short of waiting for another election one way or another then. So it seems to me like the American people would probably be much more willing to see prosecutions of these men than, say, the opposition party in Washington, D.C.
Well, I think that's right. And, we have a new poll out just released in the last hour by the Washington Post and ABC. It'll be on the news this evening, showing that a substantial majority of Americans agree with President Obama's commitment not to use torture. They're also very critical of the Bush administration about its use of torture. And a smaller majority of Americans believe that it's time now to begin a thorough investigation of what the Bush administration did.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the problem there is with whether it's Congress pushing to create a special prosecutor or to create a commission, something like that, we already know it was in the Washington Post that all the Gang of Four, I guess they call them, or the Gang of Eight even, I forget, they were in on this. Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid and Jay Rockefeller, Jane Harman, and other Democrats, they knew that the president was breaking the law and ordering people to be tortured. That's really probably the main reason why these men weren't impeached years ago.
That's right. Although one of the big breakthroughs we've had in the course of this week is that Nancy Pelosi, who up until this point had been strongly against an investigation of the torture issue, has shifted her position and she now supports it. And I think that means she's prepared to see her own conduct be subject to scrutiny here. I'm not quite sure what happened in these briefings. I mean, I've been told by some people, congressional staffers, that the Gang of Eight, that's the group you're talking to, that they got briefings, but they were told at the beginning that everything we tell you is completely secret. You're not permitted to comment on it, to reflect that you know anything about this. And I was also told that the briefings they got were very cursory. I mean, they didn't go into any detail of what the techniques were. They were told, for instance, that there are a series of new coercive techniques being used, but they've been carefully reviewed by the lawyers at the Department of Justice, and the lawyers have concluded that they are completely consistent with our legal commitments. Well, that's not much notice, actually. I mean, although I think, the criticism of them is going to be, why weren't there hearings? Why didn't they push to get more information and so forth? I think this is all turf that needs to be covered. I think we need to know a lot more detail. But, I'm not really convinced that they bought in or acquiesced to this, which is, what others, including John Cornyn in his statements today, he's saying, they knew, they agreed. No, actually, there's no evidence whatsoever that they agreed to these things.